Hello, everybody. This is Paul Hirschfeld. I'm here today to talk about one of our partners on Marketplace with Stromasys and Sandy Levitt. So, fun fact, Stromasys was the very first partner to start a paid listing on the OCI Marketplace back in 2019, and were featured at Oracle Cloud World that year. So a little bit of history there, but they've been an excellent partner ever since. And go ahead and get the obligatory safe harbor statement out of the way. So anything you hear today should not be constituted as financial advice for investment. Move on to the next slide, Sandy. All right, so again, Paul Hirschfeld here, product manager with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And we're here today to talk about Stromasys. As I was mentioning before, Stromasys is one of our most storied partners with Oracle Cloud Marketplace, going as far back as 2019. And they were the first ones to put a paid listing up on our marketplace. For your information, in case you're not aware, on the marketplace, those paid listings enable customers to consume their Oracle Universal credits and then deploy the services with click to deploy ease inside your virtual cloud networks. As Sandy will discuss in these case studies, the marketplace is just one of the ways to work with Stromasys. Stromasys does an excellent job of working with customers to analyze their needs and find the best path forward for customer satisfaction. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're from. And my name's Sandy Levitt, and I am a senior pre-sales engineer with Stromasys. Before I was with Stromasys, I spent 27 years in the legacy, well, at the time it wasn't legacy, with DEC Compact HP supporting True 64 Unix on the alphas and doing some pre-sales. And then I'm part of Stromasys right now for 8 years, and I focus on channels and alliances. And I work a lot with the cloud providers, such as with Oracle on OCI. And I do a lot of the work with Marketplace and working with the sales teams and the alliance partners to try to promote cloud migration projects. So what I'm going to do right now, I wanted to have the camera on so everybody could see what I look like, but I'm going to turn the camera off as I go through my presentation. So why we're all here today. So this is the agenda, and this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about system life cycles with the legacy systems. What do you do with legacy systems? You know, what are the solutions? You know, how Stromasys works. What are the typical Oracle applications that this might be helpful for? You know, what do you have to look into to plan? You know, considerations to moving to OCI. And, you know, the actual moving to OCI. And I'm going to review some case studies. We have 3 different case studies here to talk about, which are totally different from each other. And then in the end, we're going to talk about some resources available to everybody here on the call. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Paul, and then we're going to do some Q&A. So let's get started. So let's talk about legacy workloads and the investments and the different life cycles. So there's 3 different timelines that we talk about. So you have the hardware lifetime, and hardware has a very, very short lifespan. The minute you get a piece of hardware, there's a new piece of hardware out there that's faster, better, you know, and hardware also can fail over time. So this is the whole idea, and this is what's great about the cloud too, is that you're not in charge of the hardware. Somebody else is in charge of the hardware. But you do have this idea that someone who has legacy hardware, that hardware has been around for a long time, and there's a, you know, a shortened lifespan on the hardware. So then you talk about the operating system. So when you're talking about the operating systems, what I like to say is back in the good old days, or for me at least, back in the 1990s, there was a lot of proprietary operating systems, and, you know, such as OpenVMS or MPE. And then there were a lot of Unixes, and everybody kept saying Unix is Unix is Unix. Well, Unix was not Unix. Every Unix was different. You had, you know, HPUX, you had True 64, you had Solaris, AIX, you had all these different Unixes. And then as time went on, people started moving more and more to Windows. And people also started moving along also now to Linux. So now Linux is primarily one of the main operating systems out there, such as Oracle Linux or Red Hat Linux. So the operating system lifetime is a little bit longer and lasts a little bit longer than the hardware. And then of course you have applications. And yes, applications come out with new versions at times, but usually application lifetimes are very, very long. Once they, especially custom applications, once these applications do what they're supposed to do, they're stable, they're running your business, they're doing what they were created for. And this is what a lot of people are relying on these applications for day to day. But these applications are running on these older operating systems. But what's more, which isn't as concerning because these operating systems are still pretty stable. But what's most disconcerting is that a lot of times the hardware, especially, the legacy hardware, is obsolete and end of life and could fail at any moment. So I have this chart here that sort of shows some of these legacy systems as we go through time. We show the 70s when the PDP-11, first hit the market, all the way up to, you have HP 3000s and Suns, more HPs in the Vaxes, the Deck Gear, the Alphas, more Suns. So this just sort of shows you the evolution, as we're going through to the early 2000s, the evolution of some of these legacy systems and these large machines and these blasts from the past, as I like to call them. So what are you going to do now with this problem? You have this problem where you have your business running on these applications that are running on these legacy systems, and they're, you have that hardware issue. So basically, the risky thing is you can leave things as is, but there's a lot of quotes out there about how much an hour of downtime can cost out there from Gartner and other research, that when things go down, it's very expensive for a business. So when you leave this, your company jewels to run on this legacy hardware, a lot of times you're talking about, the risk of downtime. So you can go out and you can make sure you have enough spare parts out there. And I have talked to customers who had, 20 Sunfires and they're down to their last 2 Sunfires. So, and they're not able to find the spare parts. I used to say that eBay was our biggest competitor because people would go on eBay and they would find extra machines and spare parts. But as time goes on, we're running out of that. There's becoming less and less. And then there's the migration. A lot of people are taking their old legacy applications and upgrading them to newer versions as far as the well-known applications. But there's a lot of work that has to be done for that. Or there's a lot of code rewriting. You have to refactor, rewrite code to do this migration, to run it natively in OCI, to run it natively on Linux. So that's a great thing, and that brings everybody up to date, and it's a wonderful thing to do, but it's going to take time and it's going to take money. So even if, that's a path that you want to take, in the meantime, what's a really good, secure, and cost-effective way to do things is to run emulation, to be able to emulate that old legacy hardware so that while you're rewriting the code, or even if you decide that you need it for archival, you need data that's going to be out there and you need to access it for the next 7 to 10 years, you're going to have it in a safe, secure, cost-effective environment. So what exactly is emulation and how does it work? So with Stromasys, the way it works is you have your legacy hardware. You have for example, your Sun Sparks, your PA-RISC HPUX systems, DEC Vaxes, Alphas, and even, like I said, we still get customers who have PDP-11s out there. And they're running these legacy operating systems out there, such as the Sun Spark, running, let's say, Solaris, Solaris 8, 9, 10, run even back as Solaris, we go back to, Sun OS version 4. And you have like an old database, an Oracle, an Oracle database, perhaps, Oracle 9i database, and whatever custom applications you're running, a PeopleSoft application, a Forms application, or it could be a homegrown application. So what we are able to do is we're able to take that hardware, that at-risk hardware that's about to fail, and put it out there in OCI, put it out in cloud compute on x86, and run it on, have a Linux layer. We do need to run on Linux, whether it be, CentOS, Rocky, Oracle Linux, Red Hat. And there's our solution, the Charon solution. And what's really, really neat about this is that once we're emulating that hardware, everything, the operating system, your database, your applications, nothing changes. It's just a dump and restore. It's a lift and shift that we bring over as is. So your end users don't have to worry about any changes or anything different. And while this is going on, this also, like I said, if you want to end up rewriting or updating, this at least gives you the time while you're sitting in OCI, running on the emulator, to think about how you want to move forward with your business. So this is on the back of our business cards. Whenever we go around and we start talking to people, we go, go to trade shows. This is our elevator pitch, basically, about how Stromasys works. And I'll go into a little bit more detail, a little bit further into the slides, in a few slides later. Not a ton of detailed. If you really want like the nitty gritty, feel free to contact us and we'll be more than happy to give you a more detailed technical presentation. So now I'm going to talk to you about our Charon-SSP product family. And this is our most popular product, and this is the one where we talk about bringing this to the cloud. So we have 3 different versions. We have Charon-SSP 4M, which is that 32-bit emulator. This goes up to Solaris 9. We're talking about the old workstations. We're talking about systems from 1994. Then we have Charon-SSP 4U. This is the 4U emulator, and it emulates up to Solaris 10. And these were the Sunfire V series, like the Sunfire V240s, the Sunfire 880s, the enterprise systems, the Sun Ultras, and even some of the Sun M systems, which is when zones first came into play. And of course, we have our Charon-SSP 4V. And this is the Sun 4V emulator. And it was created to emulate the early UltraSpark systems, such as the T1 and T2s, like the T1000s, T2000s, the T51 series, 52 series, and this goes up to Solaris 11. Now, technically, our Charon-SSP 4V emulator does emulate up to the latest and greatest T systems. It will emulate the T8 systems, and it is technically possible. But where this comes into play is we have to look at where this all came from, because it's possible that someone who's running on a T8 might have been running originally on a Sunfire that got consolidated into a T system, or they might have been running on a T1 or T2. So we used to say, no, we can't do these older T systems, these newer T systems. But then what happened is that we have to look at it all. So we have, as Stromasys, we have scripts that we run that will look at what's running on them, and also we'll look at performance, because performance does come into play. The Spark chip does run faster, and a lot of times than the x86 chip. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll say, okay, where did this come from? Are you using this for archive? What is the situation here? But in any ways, from the technical viewpoint, we do have a emulator that does do the Sun 4V systems. So now I want to talk about something I did some research on, which is when we talked about that stack, that application stack, we're talking about the database systems and application out there. I did some research. I wanted to understand what ran on these legacy systems. So when I did this research, I looked at some of the timeline of the Oracle databases. And one of the things I found out is that you had the old Oracle 8i, 9i, and 10G ran on Solaris 10 and below. It ran on True 64 Unix. It ran on HP UX. So it ran on all these proprietary Linux operating systems. Solaris 9 and 10 also supported 11G as well. And then there's something called RDB. RDB is a proprietary Oracle database that ran solely on open VMSs, which is part of our alpha family of emulators. So those were the databases that ran on top of that in that part where it says databases. And then I tried to look at what are those typical applications that you might be running on some of these older Solaris systems. So some of them that came up is, of course, SAS. We're talking about JD Edwards. We're talking ERP systems. We're talking about Enterprise One below 9.2. I hear this a lot. I hear we have JD Edwards running on our older Spark systems. E-Business Suite is another one that I hear a lot about, especially below 12.2 is more of the legacy side of things, where we're running this E-Business Suite. We're running it on top of an old Oracle database, running it on top of an old version of Solaris on this aging hardware. And then of course, PeopleSoft. So these are some of these applications and database systems that are running on these more legacy systems. And of course, people will have their custom applications that they will be running. So, you know, when you're ready to move these to the cloud, like I had talked about before, we have to look at what your current environment looks like. Do you have zones? Do you have logical domains, which were things that happened on the T systems that are broken down, and you know how we bring each LDOM over individually. What are these performance requirements? Is there performance requirements? What data needs to be migrated? How much data needs to be migrated? And then, of course, the most important thing is which OCI cloud shape should be used. Since we are it's very much important that the x86 chip are fast, you know, that they have fast clock speed. Right now, the flex shape, the optimized flex shape at 3.0 gigahertz is probably the best. And what's really good about the flex shapes is the fact that you can pick out how many OCP, you know, how many CPUs you need, how much memory and storage. You can do that a la carte and mix and match as you need. So, you know, we do look at that and, you know, how much is needed, and then pick that all out. And then, of course, the final decision needs to be made is, if you're talking about a database, do you want to move the database natively to Linux on x86, or do you want to leave it with the legacy apps? Do you want to leave it on Solaris with whatever applications are out there? And people can go both ways. You can do one or the other, and it's perfectly fine to either leave it native, or you know, to go to native, or leave it with the legacy apps. So these are some of the things you think about when you're trying to move to the cloud and you want to move to OCI and you have these Solaris workloads. So next question is, and this is, like I said, this is a really high level viewpoint. We can always go into more detail, especially if you contact us here at Stromasys. We can talk more about the nitty gritties, but just for a webinar like this, the major ways of how you want to move to the cloud is you're going to set up, you know, the virtual machine in the cloud with the proper shape, all the firewall, security, networking set up, you know, how you're going to communicate back to on-premise if you need to, or to other areas in the cloud. What are going to be your storage choices, your thoughts about disaster recovery, and how you're going to want to run the emulator? Because there's two choices. There's, of course, we're in Marketplace, which still be, you know, which is very, very important, because in Marketplace, you can spin it up and pay per hour, and the image is right there. Or if you're looking for something that's more on an annual basis, we do have RPM packages out there for OCI that you can run that way. So we do offer both ways for the emulator. And then, of course, once it's all up and running and set up, because you do have to set it up to match the original Spark system, you have to bring it over. Well, basically how this works is, you configure the emulator, and then you're going to need a Solaris ISO image to boot to, for example, the single user mode or whatever, to boot up a basic image so that you have the tools to dump and restore all your file systems from the original system. So basically, whether you use UFS dump and restore, or whether you're using ZFS, or however you want to bring that data over, if it's a database, using the database tools like RMAN or whatever. So it's a backup and restore. What I like to say here is bringing it back to the, like I said, I'm still living in the 1990s apparently, because I'm remembering the days when field service came out and they used to replace your system, and you'd have a brand new system out there. You'd have to boot the CD-ROM, set up everything, and then you'd have, back then, tape drives, and you'd put in your, hopefully your backups that were good in your tape drive and restore them from backup. And this process is very, very similar in this way, that we are just in a matter of days, then we're able to move your Solaris workloads over to OCI and into the cloud. So now I'm going to move on to some case studies, to actual customers who's actually done this, and someone who used Marketplace, customer who didn't use Marketplace, and then a customer who actually, instead of doing used our other product, used our deck out, Charon-SSP for Alpha, to move a VMS system over. So I have 3 different case studies to talk about, because everybody does love a good case study. So for the first case study, this was something where Marketplace was very, very important. This wouldn't have happened without Marketplace for various different reasons, which I will go into as I discuss the case study. We were approached by the customer account team. This is a well-known Fortune 500 customer, and they came to us and they said, we have a current T8 system, and it's been up, and here's the case which I brought up earlier. These were upgraded from older T systems. They contain global and non-global zones on top of different logical domains, and they were running, Solaris 1011. And this had an older WebLogic application, an IBM application called WebLogic. And the issue is that they were having to pay for licensing for the entire T system, the whole T8, but they were not using the entire T8 system for running the WebLogic, because part of the system was actually running the databases on their own in their own LDOMs. So they were running across this thing where, okay, we need a solution here, because we don't want to pay for licenses that we're not using. And we also have a lot of OCI credits, which is really, really critical. With the whole Marketplace, you can burn down your OCI credits. And we need to test this, and we need to see how this works. So basically, it was a collaboration between the Oracle account and technical team. Various different technical teams in Oracle was involved with the implementation, and with assistance from the Stromasys technical team. So then once this was all done and we had the new state, it was decided that the emulator would be used for some instances of the application to help, like I said, reduce that cost of the licensing for the application. But the database would continue to run on premise. And, this was the best of all worlds. They had the cloud flexibility. They could pick this, they were able to pick the flex shapes and set those all up and bring over the global zone with the other zones in it. And it was really fast to deploy with the image, and we have, getting started documentation. But was really critical here too was the Oracle SAs and the Oracle team was able themselves to learn our emulate, work with us to figure out how our emulator works so that they could work with the customer. And there was even an Oracle performance team that came in to also work with it. So it was a nice collaboration there. And the customer, like I said, they're not having to go through, as a customer, not having to go through purchasing, because we know how, going through purchasing sometimes can be a lot of paperwork. They could use their existing cloud credits, and we were able to step in and assist where needed. So in this case, using the hourly and using the marketplace was ideal. But in the next case study that I have, which is more of a archive situation with databases, this was a direct situation where it was going into OCI more on an annual basis. So basically for this communication technology company, once again, this was brought to us by a OCI account team, but what's different about this customer was they were not an existing OCI customer. They were new to cloud, new to OCI, and this was their first, sticking the toe into the pool, like into the, sticking the little pinky toe in. They wanted to see how cloud works. So this was a great first thing to do, was to put a QA dev system that acted as an archive for production, because they had T4 systems. And as we talked about hardware, and we talk about hardware possibly failing, what happens if something happens to these T4 systems? This was a big concern for these customers. We have these two systems. In this case, there were some Oracle databases. So we wanted to make sure, similar to the other case study, there's always a cost for the core counts. So we wanted to make sure that we kept with the core counts. So it was decided that we need a proof of concept. A paid proof of concept was an important first step. So we did a full evaluation of the system and workload, and we wanted to make sure that we had the right CPU count to match the performance. And like I said, we were not looking to move production, but rather we were looking to have development and the archive system sitting in OCI. So when we look at the new state, the POC was done in collaboration between once again, between the OCI SA and Stromasys. In both these case studies, we did have an OCI team involved. That's not necessary, but it's always nice when we are collaborating with the Oracle and the Oracle Cloud teams. The tenancy was created for the customer. Everything was set up. And in this case, we were able to use the AMD x86 processor types with 16 CPUs and 528 gigabytes of memory. The emulator was installed. We took the backups and restored, and we used a lot of RMAN backups to do this and continue to, for the archive purposes, that's the way we continue to bring it over. And there were 22 databases that are running out there for the archive, for the production, as well as to be able to do dev test. So this allows the customer now to, not worry about what happens if something happens to my production system, because out there in the cloud, they basically have a duplicate of a lot of their data sitting out there using Stromasys as, for that system. And finally, this is the last case study. I know you guys are probably all like, hopefully I'm not boring you guys too much, but I would like to talk about this case study because it's very different than the other two. This case study was from a Canadian medical marketing. And in this case, we're talking about alphas. We're talking about an alpha server running an older version of OpenVMS. And this is a COBOL application. Normally people associate COBOL with IBM, but in this case, this COBOL application was running on VMS. Like I had mentioned before, a lot of times, when you had these proprietary operating systems, a lot of regular applications ran on that. And they didn't have too many users, but this was very important for this business. Order fulfillment jobs ran here, and these things are running by operators, batch jobs. This was not something where performance was the most important part, but it had to stay up. And the idea of this alpha system, which was really, really aging, being 15 plus years old, was really concerning to the customer. So they left the Oracle database on Linux on premise. They weren't ready to move that to the cloud at the time. They had VMS support through third party who had, which was perfectly fine because this company VSI, who supports the VMS operating system, we worked very closely with them. And the customer wanted to stay on their older version, and they had an older alpha, just so it, sitting, but still they were very, very much concerned about downtime. So we were able to, through OCI, to set up a minimum at the time, because it was years ago, a B12 shape, and install our version of AXP and restore the file systems. We made sure the communication between the database that was still on-prem was set up. And Oracle assisted in a lot of making sure that everything was set up properly. And this was all seamless. But most important to the customer, once again, is that VMS, the operating system, can do their backups now to virtual, to make backups in the cloud to a scratch disk and copy it, wherever they need to. So they don't have to worry if they ever have to restore from backups. They're not worrying about tapes anymore. Everything is sitting out there in OCI in the cloud where it's nice and safe. So that's the end of the case studies. And I'm coming to the end of my part of the presentation. One thing I'd like to, that's here, is we have various resources. We have, from our website, we have Charon and Oracle Cloud. There's, of course, the link to the marketplace settings, and there's the getting started guides. And we have these different overview clouds, which can be downloaded. And we weren't sure who on this call is an actual end user customer, who might be a partner or potential partner. So as a partner, or who might even be an Oracle OCI rep. So basically, depending on what you're looking for, we have these, these overview cards that you can easily present back to your teams, to whoever in your organization, that just shows you ways of which you can bring your Sun, mostly your Sun Solaris, but of course these other systems over into OCI. You can do it with Marketplace, without Marketplace. So we have these resources. And of course, you can always contact me. My email is, and I think one of the slides has my email towards the end, which is sandy.levitt, Levitt, at stromasys.com. Or even, if you go to our website, there's a contact us and a way to get a hold of us. For anybody who would like more information, is very much interested in this, you can contact us. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Paul, who's going to talk a little bit more about Marketplace.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. So just a couple quick slides on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace, and then we'll get to the Q&A. We'll give Sandy a chance to take a look at some of the questions that were posted there. But the Oracle Cloud Marketplace, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially an online store where ISVs and independent software vendors such as Stromasys and others can meet with all of Oracle Cloud's customers as well as Oracle Cloud sellers. So as you can see, there are 400,000 plus customers who visit the marketplace. There are 20,000 plus Oracle sellers out there, and we have several thousand ISVs on the OCI marketplace. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is just a quick picture to illustrate some of the depth and breadth of the partners that we have on the marketplace. We cover a lot of ground with a lot of well-known names as well as a lot of niche players. And of course, this is expanding every day. As you can see here, Stromasys is highlighted for what they've done. And again, to reiterate, they've been a great partner for us and always willing to work with Oracle Cloud sellers, customers to find the best solution for our end users. If you want to visit the Cloud Marketplace, there is a link down there at the bottom. But of course, if you put Oracle Cloud Marketplace into a search engine, it should bring you right to that homepage for the marketplace. And with that, Sandy can thank everybody and move on to Q&A.
Yes. So I'm going to let my colleague, who's on this call as well, he's going to give me what questions you guys are throwing at me, and hopefully I can answer them. If I can't, please reach out after this, and I'll try to get back to you after the webinar.
Great. Nice job, Sandy. So we have a few questions. I'll start with a question on licensing, but before I get into the question on licensing, I will say that we will include in the final version of this an additional resource that we've made available that helps customers understand their rights and obligations when it comes to dealing with Solaris licensing and the different Solaris licensing types that have been issued over the years and might currently be in use. So that resource will be added to the final list. So the question on licensing, Sandy, was how is the licensing taken care of during the move to the emulated solution? Because some of our licenses are based on core-based. And as a second part of that question, the question is whether legacy OS support is provided by Stromasys if there's issues post-migration.
Oh, that's a loaded question. So licensing can be complicated because there's two things we're talking about licensing. There's Oracle, for example, Oracle databases and licensing. And that's why we carefully do look at core count. There are some third-party companies out there sometimes, but Oracle also, your Oracle person, you can look at the core count and count what your core count looks like. And we try to make sure that we try to fit into that whole thing. The second case study was very important about this. The Oracle SA came to us and said, we have to fit this in this many OCPUs because of the licensing. And that's, as far as the application licensing. As far as the Solaris and supporting of Solaris, normally Stromasys does not support Solaris. So there are cases where, we could talk to somebody about that. And if it's important to have Solaris support, that would be something that, we could talk about operating support, because I think that is something that we are, especially for the older versions, we are starting to look into doing. The issues does become what version of Solaris. And when was this, because Oracle itself right now is basically doing, mostly support of the latest version, the latest 11, I think it's 11.4 version, and some of the 11 versions. As far as the older versions, a lot of them are on, there's not, there is some, support in terms of maybe security out there, but there's but that's just something that we just have to go, and like John mentioned, we do have some guidelines for that we can attach to the end of this as to discuss, where that sits. Because like I said, it is, do you have Solaris 8 or 9, or are you running Solaris 11.4? The answer is going to change, and it's going to depend on what kind of license you have. Similar to also, like I said, like a database license. You have an enterprise database license, which is different than, counting the cores or for your different applications. So licensing is something that is more of a one-on-one type of discussion.
Great. I think that answered the question. And kind of staying with that topic of support. So there was a question around, is there a responsibility matrix that's defined at a product level between Oracle, Stromasys, and the customer, whether or not the My Oracle support will provide direct support for the emulator? So maybe, Sandy, you can talk a little bit about how support is provided and divided up.
Well, yeah, I can talk about how support is divided up in that basically for support, we support, for our support, we support our emulator. And, something, if we think that, we'll help out something, like if we can always, our team is very well versed on Solaris. So it's not like we're going to say, okay, you got to go to Oracle for that. We'll look at it and, we can give a little bit of advice, but for the most part, what we support is we support our emulator. As far as my Oracle support goes, I have not heard of any, like I said, I have not heard of anything. I've been told by, we've been told, depending, once again, we're going back to what version, what does your contract say? And that's something that sometimes you need to talk to your Oracle reps, because different Oracle reps was, for one of the case studies, it was stated that there would be no problem, that you would continue to get support just like you always have. So I know, like I said, this is a tricky area. We do have a very good relationship with Oracle, and but like I said, I don't want to promise one thing or another in the case of what kind of support, because that does become a collaboration. Some people don't care. A lot of people, they have enough Solaris expertise still in house, and they really, they're running the older versions, and they haven't called Oracle in years, and as far as support goes, and they're okay with that. So it all depends, especially like I said, if you have much older versions, it's gonna be less of an issue.
Okay, the next question is the complicated question. So it's really related to performance. There was a couple questions related to this, but I'll try to summarize. So when setting up the OCI shape and matching the frequency of the current solution, how do we optimize that to meet the performance? And if the source legacy server has a high CPU frequency, does OCI support that frequency? How do we deal with that? So there's a lot there around performance. Yes. And I know you can speak at length on that, but maybe try to give a short.
Okay, so this is why before we will ever agree to work a project, we look at the performance on the original system. We have scripts that run and it'll look at that. If you have a high frequency T system that's fully loaded with databases and applications and using 50%, high percent of the CPU, we're going to come back and say, we can't match that performance. There's just no way. And we're honest about this. We will not commit to anything that we cannot believe we can do. But what we are finding, because we used to say flat out, no, we will only do the older systems, the 1.5 systems that ran 1.5 gigahertz or less, original systems. And we kept having people constantly come to us and say, but we upgraded from those older systems. We barely use the CPU. We're only using this for archive. We don't care about performance. So that is why we need to do that evaluation. We have scripts that we run. We need to look at it. And this is why in many situations, having a paid POC like the second case study did was very important, because we were able to test this out. We were able to look at what's that good point where the performance versus CPU count, what's that really nice sweet spot where we were able, for in this case, it was archive, so there was some leeway, but where is that? So we do recommend for most systems to have that, so that we know up front, and what you're paying for in a paid POC is you're paying for our expertise, our field engineers to come and put it out there and to work with you, and for you to test and make sure everything's going the way you want it to go. But we will tell you up front if we don't even think that a paid POC will, work with you. We have turned people away when we said, listen, you're running this brand new T system in these logical domains or these zones, and they're killing the CPU. There is absolutely no way with these, or it's heavy IO database, you're pounding this thing. We can't match that, because like I said, these Spark chips do run faster than the Intel chip. They really do. And that's something really, really good, saying something about the Spark chips. But like I said, with all these data center exits and wanting to go to the cloud, this is where we come into play. So we're going to be honest.
One other question, and maybe somewhat related, the question is, what should be the main criteria to decide between a new system or an emulator?
That's like I said, that's I'm trying to think of the right way to answer that. There's various factors. You know, some people, the new system, just keep getting new systems, and you know, you want to keep running things, and you want to go out there and you want to. And I know that, you know, Oracle is selling newer T systems still. At some point, that may stop. And then, you know, as time goes on, that hardware, you're going to have less and less availability of that hardware. The main thing for the emulator is if you're looking to get off, you know, you're looking to natively move to the cloud at some point, using the emulator as a stepping stone, as the first step to go into the cloud, is probably then the better choice, because in the end, you're probably not going to keep buying new Spark systems, but you're going to rewrite that code to run natively on Linux, to run natively on x86. Data center exits, you know, do you need to get out of your data center? In which case, then getting new hardware doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's an individual factor. And if you're coming to talk to us, then this is something you're considering for whatever reason you're considering. It's not for everybody. Like I said, there are plenty of people who are going out there and they want to continue to run on premise and want to continue to run, you know, these Spark systems are, especially the new ones, are, you know, very nice for various reasons. But in one of the case studies, as we saw, they had some licensing issues with some other software that was impedance, and it was, you know, so, you know, which caused an issue where they had to do a hybrid, where they still run on the hardware for some of it, and some of it went into the emulator. So there's always that where, you know, you can do a hybrid solution.
Okay, we have two last questions. The first of those is, do we have any documentation which covers the procedure for migration / lift and shift specific to OCI with Stromasys?
We do have the getting started guide, which helps you set everything up as far as in OCI. And we have our regular, you know, documentation that does talk a lot about, you know, the dumping and restoring. We don't go into, because there's no way to have one documentation that talks about every single scenario of what you're bringing over. So it talks in general sense of using UFS dump or using ZFS and the general steps about setting up NFS in our emulator to be able to do that, or, you know, bringing things into storage in the cloud. And so our documentation does talk about it, but we do highly recommend, especially on a project, you know, utilizing our expertise as far as for implementation. I think, you know, what we have noticed is that once somebody follows us on, for example, the first implementation going forward, they understand it and they can move forward. We would like to work with Oracle. There's some talk that I've had with Paul about possibly setting up some kind of workshop in the future where people could sit and play with this, but that's not available at this point.
And I will put a link in the question and answer to one of our documents that we'll also add to the resource list. Last question, are there solutions available for IBM systems, specifically AS400?
If I had a penny for every time this question was asked, unfortunately, no. IBM is very proprietary and very secretive with all their source, and they're very litigious for anybody who tries to do anything with IBM. So we have, at this point, we've tried to talk to IBM about doing something, but it never came to anything. So unfortunately, as much as we get asked this all the time, we don't have any IBM solution.
And those are all the questions we had.
Okay, wonderful. And like I said, for anybody who's asked these questions, we welcome to have some, you know, understanding your specific environment, and we can go into a little bit more detail, and we can talk a little bit further.
Thank you, Sandy. And I would say the same thing. If there are any follow-on questions around Marketplace, there were a couple in chat. Feel free to reach out to me, and we can talk through any questions you may have around Marketplace in the list.
There we go. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and we really appreciate this. And of course, you know, you can talk to other people that you know who may have the same issues or may be interested in this. Have a great day.